My dear birds from the forest, keep calm. Something terrible has happened. I have had a terrible vision of a kind of future, something different. Gandalf, I miss you, my friend. This time is a really bad one. I need the light of my lady. I've said light! My sweet Galadriel. I need to talk to you. I have had a terrible vision. In that vision, there were two men. They were dressed in a very, I don't know how to say it, casual way. They were, how was the name? Martin Simonson or something like that, and Raul Montero Girato, I don't know. And they were speaking about, I don't know, a lot of different things. Firstly, they spoke about a man, J.R.R. Tolkien. And curiously enough, this Tolkien lived in Oxford. Oxford, what a place! It's not even in the Middle Earth. It can be possible. I know every single place here, so it can be real. I don't know. That man has a kind of interview, and then after that was the terrible thing. After that, they said that this man have written a book, and in that book, I was one of the characters, which means that I shouldn't be real. That's not possible. I mean, I can't touch myself. So, look, I'm real. So, terrible. I don't know. And then, what else? Then, this Tolkien has an interview because apparently we are part of fantastic things. This is like, I don't know, fantasy, fairy tales, secondary worlds, and stupidity. I mean, they think that magic is not real. And look, I can, create light from nowhere. So, anyway, and then, curiously enough, this man, this Tolkien, died. Of course, everyone has to die, so one day or another. And his son, Christopher Tolkien, received a prize for the work of his father. Stupidity. Anyway, but quiet. Someone is coming. I think I need to go. Light, go out. Out. No? Okay. Yeah, that is. This is me, the head of the English Literature Department at Oxford. And I have the power to decide who works here and who cannot. To be honest, so many interviews with just candidates who try to show us that, they can teach here. But we need, special teachers. Today, last one. And I think that there's going to be another year without a proper teacher. Because this candidate, yes, it's late. Anyway, I hope he will be capable of being on time. Yeah. Wait.
Terribly sorry, sir. Should I close the door, sir?
Yeah, close it. What a candidate, my goodness.
Can I?
Yes, come please, yeah, yes.
Thank thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sit down.
Yes.
Yes.
John, Ronald Roy.
Okay, yes, a pleasure. Sit down.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay. Firstly, you are late.
Oh yes, I'm terribly sorry about that, sir. I had a terrible inconvenience on my way here. Problems with dogs, cats, bicycles on the streets of Oxford.
What are you talking about?
Terrible inconveniences, sir. Yes.
Do you know that you are going to do an interview to work here at Oxford University?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous right now. It's my first interview here at Oxford, and
First and last. Anyway, so where are you from?
Well, actually, sir, I was born in South Africa. I grew up in South Africa. It was a jolly good time there for 4 years. I have terrific memories of, among other things, well, actually, now that I come to think about it, giant spiders moving around in our garden and scaring me away. That was probably my most prominent memory of South Africa, if I'm to tell you the truth. We moved. So, and I arrived here in England in a proper country after 4 years. Well into my 4th year, sir, yes, of my life. Thanks. Yes.
Okay. In Africa, spiders, terrific. Anyway, I have been just checking your CV, and I have read that you are a Catholic.
Oh, yes, yeah.
You know that we are in Oxford.
Yes, I've heard people say so, yeah. In this country, most people are Protestants, yes. Yes, I come from a Catholic family, mainly because of my mother. My mother, Mabel, she converted into Catholicism when she arrived here in England and had a terrible time because of it. So I must say that it was a big nuisance for the rest of the family, and they did not want to accept her anymore into the family. And I must say that my mother, she is a saint. I must say so. She endured numerous difficulties and problems because of her faith. And I admire her greatly because of it. So I'm not ashamed to be a Catholic. Not at all.
Okay, but you speak pretty well about your mother, but I have read that you have grown up in an orphan.
Oh, no, not really. I wouldn't say so. No, not really an orphanage, no. You see, my mother died when I was 12 years old of diabetes. And so I was allowed into the house of Father Francis Morgan, our benefactor and my tutor, who raised me as his own son, and my brother too, Hilary. And so I grew up in that way, but I wouldn't say it was an orphanage. No, not really. It was more of a family arrangement.
Right. So I think checking just here that you started with classic literature studies, and you have moved from there to Germanic literature and languages. Why?
Well, that's true, and I'm aware of the fact that it's not very orthodox now, is it? I know that the curriculum here at Oxford is strongly based on the classics, and so I was advised to begin my studies in the field of classics. Later on, however, I was very much influenced by one of the tutors here at Oxford, and he encouraged me to take up studies in Germanic language and literature instead. And I had a jolly good time with that until the war broke out afterwards and interrupted my studies. But yes, there are many works in the Germanic tradition that have not been sufficiently studied, I believe, especially not here at Oxford. And many of those works are among our finest pieces of literature. Beowulf, among other things, is one of these works that is one of the few ancient Old English epic works, and it's been entirely overlooked by the academics. Nobody seems to understand it, and I think that I might have a clue as to why it is so enduring and so appealing to us all these years, 1,000 years afterwards.
Well, I think that Beowulf is just a tale for kids, but anyway. I'm not going to start discussing with you about it. I have also read that you have been fighting against the German. Tell us something about your experience there.
Well, as all young men in those terrible years, many of us, well, almost all of us, were eventually sent to the front, yes, and I had the honor and the privilege of serving my country in France. in 1916, after a year of preparations in Northern England, among other places. I say it was a privilege, but it was also a curse to some extent. I mean, we all know what this generation of young men had to go through during those terrible years of the war, in the trenches and on the front line. A whole generation was wiped out. 2 of my best friends died in the war, and I was left with only one close friend afterwards. It was not an easy experience. I fell ill with trench fever and was sent back to England to recover. However, I must say that at the same time, those experiences in the war, they shaped me as a person, and I think I became more focused on what I really wanted to do in life afterwards.
Yeah, sorry for that. We all have lost someone, of course,
Indeed we have, yeah.
in that terrible war. Yeah. I have also been checking that you have written a dictionary. Explain it to us, please.
Well, I wouldn't say I'd written it. I collaborated. I was one of the people on the staff of the Oxford English Dictionary, yes, for a few years. I found the work very stimulating and very rewarding. It was an opportunity to delve deeper into certain aspects of language, of words, especially dealing with the etymology of words, the history of a word. I think that the history of different words, they can reveal entire worlds to us. I mean, take a word like a hobbit. I'm sorry, no, you wouldn't know about that.
A what?
Not yet. No, I'm sorry, no. I could talk about many words. I could talk about many different things that would explain the whole history, whole historical episodes to us, maybe even imaginary realms. I mean, there are so many strange words out there. But I'm sorry, sir, I get carried away here.
Oh my goodness, yes, you are indeed. Okay, just to finish, Mr. Tolkien, last question. Which are your research interests?
Oh, well, I have many, although they are reduced to quite limited scope of time, I'm afraid. I believe that we can't study literature without also studying language. They go together, you see. So I think also that the curriculum here at Oxford should be radically changed. I think that actually we should combine language and literature and have the two of them come together in order to stimulate the students to engage in both disciplines, in order to understand both language and literature much better. And I must say, sir, that there is too strong emphasis on the Renaissance. I personally believe that the best British literature was written before Chaucer.
Sorry. Okay. I think that Mr. Tolkien is good enough. Okay, now you can leave. And if necessary, we will call you back and
Oh, I see. So you don't want to see my credentials then?
No, it's not necessary. Thank you.
So I should leave now, yeah?
Yes, leave, please.
Okay. Thank you very much then,
thank
sir. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah,
I hope I'll see you again soon.
Yes.
Yeah,
you can leave, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Shall I close the door after?
Yeah, please, of course, do it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your time.
Okay, you're welcome. Bye. What a plan. Okay. This candidate, no. This one, no. This, I have no candidate. What to do? Do you think that this one can be a good candidate? Yeah. To be honest, I don't care. I have no more. Oh. I have to think about it. I still remember the interview I had here several years ago with the young, for at that time, scholar Dr. Tolkien. I remember that he spoke about strange words, some difficult ideas. And now, he and his friend C.S. Lewis, they have decided to change the whole idea of our university. I'm just a number. I'm not important anymore. And I don't know, they have written fantasies. I don't know even how to name fantasies, fairy tales, fairy stories, whatever. I think that this is the time for me to retire. But anyway, I will do the effort of reading, because I know that most of you don't do it. But anyway, how is it? Yes, The Hobbit. What a stupidity, The Hobbit. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. A hobbit, yeah.
This is the Hobbit trilogy and Lord of the Rings in 3 minutes. Let's begin. Sauron, an evil necromancer, crafts and delivers 20 rings of power to the races of Middle-earth in order to corrupt them all to evil. He is defeated in battle and his own ring is lost for hundreds of years. Smeagol, an innocent hobbit, discovers and keeps the ring. The ring gives him long life and he is slowly deformed from its powerful influence, becoming the creature of Gollum. Centuries later, on the other side of Middle-earth, Smaug, a vicious and powerful dragon, infiltrates the dwarf kingdom of the Lonely Mountain, driving the dwarves into exile. The dwarves seek help from the elves, but they refuse. Thorin Oakenshield, the leader of the dwarves, employs the help of the wizard Gandalf, who leads them to the hobbit Bilbo Baggins, believing Bilbo can help them sneak into the Lonely Mountain without being noticed by Smaug. Upon the journey, Bilbo discovers Smeagol and Gollum and Sauron's Ring of Power. Bilbo steals the ring and continues his journey as Gollum vows to find the ring again in an obsessive rage. Bilbo makes it to the Lonely Mountain and helps the dwarves and the nearby village of Lake Town kill Smaug. However, Smaug's defeat kind of leaves the races of the dwarves, elves, and men in dispute as to who gets to keep the treasure of the Lonely Mountain. So a war is fought that eventually includes goblins and orcs and is dubbed the Battle of the Five Armies. The men, elves, and dwarves band together to fight against the goblins and wargs, and eventually reconcile their differences, even though Thorin dies in battle. Bilbo only accepts a small portion of the treasure as a reward for his journey, and he returns to his home in the Shire. Years pass. Sauron becomes aware that the ring has been found yet again. He raises orc armies in preparation for a new takeover of all Middle-earth. The forces of evil capture and interrogate Smeagol. He tells them a hobbit is in possession of the ring. In the Shire, Bilbo reluctantly gives the ring to Frodo Baggins, his nephew. This ignites the treacherous journey from the Shire to Mount Doom, the only place where the ring can be destroyed. Frodo travels with fellow hobbits Sam, Merry, and Pippin, as well as Gandalf, Aragorn, the true king of Gondor, Gimli, and Legolas. Gandalf dies. They are separated, with Sam and Frodo traveling on their own, while their friends help recruit reinforcements from men and the elves, but not the dwarves because they're all basically dead. And they even make some friends along the way, like the Aunt Tree people, the Deadmen Oathbreakers, and Gandalf, who kinda just comes back to life. Smeagol joins Frodo and Sam. He attempts to sabotage their relationship in an effort to steal the ring. Despite his attempts, however, Frodo and Sam make it to Mount Doom. Aragorn and his small army make their last stand at the gates of Mordor. Frodo struggles with Gollum before the ring is tossed into the molten lava at the mountain's core. The ring is finally destroyed, Aragorn's army defeats Sauron once and for all, and peace is restored to Middle-earth. Aragorn takes the throne at Gondor, and Frodo returns home to the Shire briefly before sailing away with the elves and his uncle as they travel into the great unknown. And Sam gets married and lives happily ever after.
Well, terrible nuisance. Don't give us time even to mark exams nowadays. Ghastly affair. Let's see here. Exams, more exams. Let's see here. Oh, here's an empty sheet. Oh, wonderful. Let's see, maybe I can write something here. In a hole in the ground. Yeah, that was the first sentence of the book. Oh, yeah. Oh. It is a ghastly affair to correct exams all of a sudden. I hate it. Yes, come on in, please. Yes.
Hello. Good afternoon. May I come in?
I don't know. Do you have an appointment?
Yes, sir.
My secretary has given you...
Yes. My name is Christopher Rigg from the Times Literary Supplement, the most important literary supplement all over the world.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's the most important literary supplement.
Yes, it is indeed, sir. It is. Yeah.
So, what gives me this unexpected pleasure?
Because we are going to prepare a magazine, and we want you to be our star.
Oh, no. I know that you have been writing about modernism, which is a trend that I do not agree with at all. I think that many of the postulates of modernism are outright perverse.
Excuse me, may I can...
Go ahead.
Start
Then,
with the
go
interview?
ahead.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Okay, here are the questions. My editor has prepared them for me, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Tolkien, you have
Professor Tolkien, if you don't mind.
yes, sorry, Professor. Professor Tolkien, you have just published The Lord of the Rings. Is it a sequel from The Hobbit?
A sequel to The Hobbit? Well, now that you're asking, I mean, my publishers, Allen and Unwin, they first asked me to write a sequel. Yes, they asked me to write the second part of The Hobbit because of its success. It was an unexpected success that gave me a lot of pleasure. I must admit it. It was totally unexpected. And yes, they wanted more stories about hobbits. So, yes, I sat down in the fall of 1938, I believe it was, and to write another story about hobbits. But then it turned out, you see, that this was a tale that grew in the telling. It expanded, and I found myself writing a much darker story with a lot more depth in it, spatially, temporally, everything. So it turned out to be something rather different than a sequel to The Hobbit, you see. It's a lot more to The Lord of the Rings than it is to The Hobbit, you see. And I don't know if you have appreciated that in the reading, have you?
Next question. Yeah. In your novel, after reading it, I have realized that there is a kind of sense of escapism. Am I right?
I beg your pardon, sir. What did you just say?
Escapism.
Okay, so would you mind explaining what your definition of escapism is?
Not facing the reality?
Not facing the reality. So you're implying that in my book, there's no measure of reality. Is that
I think
well,
so. Yeah.
I must clarify one or two things here, I think. There are many visions of what reality is made up of, and aren't there? There's not one single reality, is there? That one would put in a little box and say, hello, here we have reality. You can open it up and take a look at it and maybe analyze it and put it apart. And no, I think we all agree that reality is made up of a vast array of different circumstances and a vast array of interpretations too. And for that matter, we live in a world which has become very ugly because of all these new inventions, this new technology that is, becoming quite unbearable in our everyday life. All, the noise in the streets, people cutting down trees to make room for parking lots. And so I think it's perfectly licit to write a story which appreciates the beauty of the natural world, for instance, other forms of beauty, which is not all centered on machines. I mean, could one honestly say that a car, an automobile, is more real than a horse? I don't think so, and I don't think you would say so either, sir. I think that we should not confuse the escape of the prisoner, for example, in Nazi Germany. Let's say that you're taken prisoner, the prisoner of war in Nazi Germany. Isn't it okay to try and escape that prison and go back home? That's perfectly fine now, isn't it? Now, that's not the same thing as the flight of the deserter, right? To be a deserter is something entirely different. And I, my dear sir, would say that I am using the concept of escapism in the first sense. That is, as a licit response to an ugly reality, we need a doses of beauty. Yes, I really think we do.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, you can just say yes at the beginning.
Okay, well,
But, yeah.
need a clarification there.
Then, I have not seen heroines. All the characters are male characters. What about women?
Yeah, that is a typical question that you would ask, isn't it, from the Times Literary Supplement. You're all going on about gender studies, about prominence of women nowadays and all that, and that's very well and fine, but you see, I wanted to do something radically different. My story is set in an imaginary past which is based on the Middle Ages, and do you think that women had such a lot of prominence in the Middle Ages? I wanted to portray a heroic society, for God's sake. I mean, most of them are men, and I must say also, to my own defense here, that there are prominent women in my story. Now that I come to think of it, there are a few, at least 2 or 3. And one of them is really, Galadriel. Have you read the book?
Yeah, almost.
What could you say about Galadriel, for example? Who is she? Is she a little insignificant secondary character in the book, or is she the strong, prominent woman that? Yes.
No.
So I don't know. I'm really not sure what you're complaining about. Really not sure. Next question, please.
Okay,
Move on
okay,
with
okay.
it.
I don't know. Okay, I have seen that most evil characters do not share any characteristic with us, Anglo-Saxon. Can we speak about racism?
Now we're on to it again, aren't we? Race, class, gender. I suppose next question will be about aristocracy and aristocratic values in the Anglo-Saxon world or something.
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
No. No.
Good. Very good. So the question was? Racism, for God's sake. You know, I mean, it's outrageous that you should make this question after having read the book. I think it becomes perfectly clear that the protagonists of this story, they're about this size. About this size. They are small people, small, insignificant. They turn out to be the great winners. They turn out to be the persons who actually manage to change the world for the better. Small persons, not the big, strong, aristocratic characters, are they? And I think also that we should pay attention to not only to human beings in this work, but also to the natural world. I think that there are many characters, even trees, that have become strong characters throughout the telling of this tale. And I actually discovered the Ents due to my strong dislike of a scene in Shakespeare. And I wanted to give some prominence to the natural world. So it's not only about humans. Racism. I love variety. I love it. And I think that Hitler was an aberration. And one of the things I most hated about Hitler was that he made forever cursed the concept of northern courage. This old Norse value that inspired people to create such fantastic mythologies up there in Iceland. And now we can't use it anymore because we'll be accused of being racist just because of this ghastly German little bigot. Next question, please. Move on with it.
Okay, yes, just one more. Professor Tolkien. Yes.
Okay, make it short then.
I have no problems in reading the novel, but I would say that the style is old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that I have difficulties, to read it properly, and sometimes the reading is not, the fastest.
Well, I expect you have difficulties with that. Have you ever studied medieval literature?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you've seen a modernized version of Beowulf, for example. Yes, I suppose you have. You're all interested in the latest fashions, aren't you? But I would say to my defense here that although the style of this book is, well, experimental, in one way it's also traditional, I do employ traditional diction, archaic vocabulary, and then even verse with traditional forms. But at the same time, I have endeavored to create a dialogue between different literary genres that I think works quite well, actually. Now, for instance, how is it possible that a person like Theoden can engage in a conversation with a hobbit? They come from 2 completely different worlds, they have 2 completely different ways of interacting, of talking to each other, and yet they become close friends. How is that possible? Would that happen in T.S. Eliot? Would that happen in The Wasteland?
No, definitely.
Wouldn't, would it? Would it happen in James Joyce's Ulysses? No, because you see, they are ironic. They want them to clash. They want the different traditions to break down, and they only want a fragmented world. The modernists, they have this vision of reality, which I don't agree with, in which everything is fragmented, it's chaotic, everything is swirling around in a mysterious universe that we don't understand, and we're just confused and small, and we'll end up dying without knowing why we lived. And I just quite don't agree with that vision of the world, you see. So I wouldn't say that my work is outdated. No, I think it's just as modern as the works of the modernists, but in a different way. And thank you, sir. Now I have exams to correct, so you can be on your way now, yes? And I hope that you will provide me with a very positive review of my book. Thank you very much, and the door is over there.
Yeah,
you can close it down.
One more question.
Yes. No, I'm very sorry. I need to finish marking my exams. So
thank you,
yes,
Professor
thank
Tolkien.
You. Yeah, thank you. On your
See
way.
you. Bye.
Good morning, yes, good morning. Just plain impossible to get any decent work done here these days. I mean, these little fellows, you just pop in. Well, I was marking exams, wasn't I? Yeah. What is this? I've lost my concentration. Might as well go back to my essay on fairy stories and revise it a little bit. Maybe I could show it to my dear friend C.S. Lewis. Let's see here. How did I write this now? Yes, I was saying something. Well, I propose to speak about fairy stories, though I am aware that this is a rash adventure. Fairy is a perilous land, and in it are pitfalls for the unwary, dungeons for the overbold. And overbold I may be accounted, for though I have been a lover of fairy stories since I learned to read and have at times thought about them, I have not studied them professionally. I have been hardly more than a wandering explorer or trespasser in the land, full of wonder, but not of information.
Including in fairy stories, which I think is rather ridiculous. After all, the magic of myths or fairy stories is not an end in itself. It exists to serve virtue. It satisfies certain primordial human desires.
But myths are fiction. The stories they tell aren't true. They're lies and therefore worthless, even though breathed through silver. They're just beautiful lies. You can't seriously believe in fairy tales.
Why not? I can, in fact, I do.
But this is preposterous. How can you seriously believe a lie?
Oh, Jack, myths are not lies. In fact, they're the very opposite of a lie. Myths convey the essential truth, the primal reality of life itself.
Go on.
Well, you see, we have been duped into using the word myth as being synonymous with a lie, because we have been duped into accepting the first real lie of materialism.
And what is that?
That is the hideous claim that there is no supernatural order to the universe. The materialists have imprisoned us in a world of mere matter, of physical facts, divorced from and devoid of metaphysical truth. Well, I say that they are lying. I say that they are the ones who have come up with a false myth. Their world doesn't exist. It's merely a figment of their imagination. Well, fine. However, there's a problem. The problem is they have convinced us that it is true. They have made us believe that this is all there is. 3 dimensions, 5 senses, 4 walls.
Isn't it?
Most emphatically not. Jack, the 4 walls of materialism are the 4 walls of a prison, and the materialists are our jailers. Don't you see? They've put us in a prison of 4 walls. They don't want us to see what's beyond those walls. They don't want us to discover what lies outside their narrow philosophy. Worse than that, they think that any attempt to escape from the prison is an act of treason.
Well, wouldn't it be an act of treason against rationality to believe otherwise?
Now, Jack, think for a moment. How can it be wrong for a prisoner to think of things that exist other than walls or jailers? Doesn't the fact that the prisoner is able to think of things outside the walls suggest that perhaps things do exist outside the walls? After all, if the prison really is all there is, how are we able to picture things that exist beyond the prison? And this is where myths come in, you see. Myths exist outside the prison. Myths allow us to escape from the prison. Or if we are not able to escape, at the very least they allow us to catch a fleeting but oh so powerful glimpse of the beauty that lies beyond the walls.
But what is it that we're meant to be glimpsing?
Well, don't you see? The truth, Jack. Myths show us a fleeting glimpse of truth itself.
Truth. Truth. What on earth is this truth that you're talking about?
Quid est veritas? What is truth? I'm glad to see that you've entered into the spirit of the myth, Jack. You've just cast yourself into the role of Pilate.
Pilate? Oh, I see. You're able to believe in the lesser myths because you've already accepted the big one. Once you accept the big myth, the lie of Christ, it's easy to accept the smaller ones. All right, Tollers, I'll play the role of Pilate. I'll wash my hands of the whole nonsense.
Well, Jack, you may be able to wash your hands, but your mind is still muddied. You're not thinking clearly at all, old chap. You're acting as if myths are mere arbitrary inventions of fiction, as if we pull them out of thin air. But what you don't understand is that we make things by the law in which we are made. We create because we are created. Creativity, imagination, is God's imageness in us. We tell stories because God is a storyteller. In fact, He is the storyteller. We tell our stories with words. He tells His story with history. The facts of history are His words, and providence is His storyline.
Are you suggesting that all of history, that everything around us is all part of some divine myth?
We are all part of His story. This very conversation is part of His story.
But perhaps it isn't His story, perhaps it's only your story. How can you know that your story, the story that you believe, the Christian story, is any more real than the other stories?
But don't you see, it isn't my story, it's His story. You're acting as if Christianity is one myth among many. It's not, it's the true myth. Christianity really happened. Jesus really existed, so did Pilate. And yet it is this true story that makes sense of all the other stories. It is the archetype. It is the story in which all the other stories have their source, and the story to which all the other stories point. It has everything. It has catastrophe and its opposite, what we might call eucatastrophe. It has the joy of the happy ending, the sudden joyous turn in the story that is essential to all myths. It has to a sublime degree this joy of deliverance, this evangelium, this fleeting glimpse of the real joy, to which all other joys are but a distant echo.
Tollers, what did you mean by catastrophe and eucatastrophe?
Well, for example, it has the catastrophe of the fall and the eucatastrophe of the redemption. It has the catastrophe of the crucifixion and the eucatastrophe of the resurrection. It has everything man's heart desires, because it is being told by the one who is the fulfillment of desire itself. It is a story that begins and ends in joy.
But just because a story brings joy, it doesn't necessarily follow that it's true. There are many joyful myths. They all seem rather flimsy to me and ring rather false.
And yet this story has the inner consistency of reality. There is no tale ever told that men would rather find was true, and none which so many skeptical men have accepted as true on its own merits.
Perhaps it's just a very well-written artifice.
This story has the supremely convincing tone of primary art, not fiction, but of creation. And to reject this leads either to darkness or to wrath. And in my own life, it has led me from darkness to light.
Astonishing. Tolders, you astonish me. You absolutely astonish me.
Dear colleagues, I, Richard Ovenden, as the boldest librarian, want to say thank you. A new year is here, and the Bolded Medal is going to be for the Professor Christopher Tolkien. You know that this prize is very important, one of the most important ones in the world. His contribution has been an outstanding contribution to the world of communications and literature. And he respects the spirit of our founder. Now it's going to be the time for the questions, but it's also the time for the winner of the prize. The man is here. Let's say, welcome to Professor Christopher Tolkien. Welcome.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Sit down, please. Okay, Professor Tolkien. Now, as the present winner of the prize, it's a pleasure to see you here. You have accepted it. You know that now you have almost achieved the reputation of your father. This is a very important achievement.
The pleasure is all mine, yeah. I must say, it was an honor for me to receive this prize. I'm very pleased, yes. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Now it's going to be my time. I'm going to ask you several questions, and then some of my mates will go on with more questions.
Of course.
Right?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. People say that you lived off your father. Is it true?
I lived off my father, did I? No, I wouldn't say it's true, though I've made a good deal of money. I won't try and hide that fact from you. We all know that Tolkien Enterprises have been extremely successful over the past 25 years, but I wouldn't say that I lived off my father. I think that's a pretty nasty way of putting it, actually. But I'd say the following. Actually, he lived off me. I mean, I was working for him when he was writing The Lord of the Rings, and I was making the maps for him, and I don't think that he paid a lot for that.
It's true.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as far as we know, you have published several manuscripts your father didn't want to publish. Why?
Well, I think that's a truth with certain nuances to it. I think that he wanted to publish the Silmarillion, for example. He wanted to publish that book all through his life, but he just kept working on it, and he was never able to bring it to an end. My father was the kind of character who would never be satisfied with what he had written. He would go over it over and over again, and he would labor over the pages for years. And to tell you the truth, I don't think that even if he had lived another 100 years, would he have been able to bring out the Silmarillion. So I think, personally, I'm pleased with the result. Back in 1975, I decided to retire from Oxford University, where I held the same position as my father, in order to try and bring out some of those unpublished manuscripts of my father's, to show them to the world, because I think there was a huge interest after The Lord of the Rings was published in his other writings, and there were rumors circulating saying that he had written so many things and there was so little that we had seen. And I felt it as my obligation to try and bring that out, to show it to the rest of the world. And I have striven to comply with my father's desires and his particular style as far as I've been able to when I've been preparing the manuscripts. For example, the Silmarillion is very close to what he would have liked to see in print, I'm sure of it. And I also think that is the world a worse place because of the Silmarillion, because it's now published and available to the readership? I don't think so. I think it's a better place. I think many people have derived enormous satisfaction out of those works. And so actually I think I've made them a favor. There are many other books that have been published over the years, of course. Some of them have been more successful than others, but all of them belong to one vast mythology. They're all part of this mythology. There are no tale that is completely detached from the rest in terms of style and in terms of the overall project concerning his own mythology. Now, he wanted to write a mythology for England. He felt that England did not have its own proper mythology. England had been invaded so many times, and the invaders had brought their own visions, their own mythologies, their own legends. And it turned out that English literature had become a hodgepodge of different traditions coming from abroad. And he felt a bit jealous, a bit envious even, of small countries in Europe, such as Iceland or Finland, that had their own mythologies. And in England, this nation of vast historical importance, they did not have anything similar to that. So he always felt that he wanted to contribute to his country in some way by endowing it with its own mythology. And this was his contribution to England. That I strongly think that that's what he felt. And he wasn't able to finish that in his lifetime, so it fell upon my shoulders to carry on with that task.
Okay, right, thank you. Have you ever heard the term Tolkien estate, which is money-maker machine?
Yeah. Well, the Tolkien estate is it's an entity that we were forced to create due to all the pressure we were put to, legal pressure, to bring out, especially in film adaptations, the works of my father. And that would have had disastrous effect if we had not been able to organize in such a way so as to protect the integrity, the aesthetic integrity of my father's works. So I think that it is something that has been extremely useful in that sense. Of course, it has made a lot of money, but much of that money has also been used in order to produce new editions of the works, to bring them out to a vast audience. Okay. I wouldn't say it's a money-making machine. I think it's an entity that's there to make sure that nothing of what my father wrote is shown in a dubious light.
Right. And my last question. What do you think about Peter Jackson's adaptations?
Well, there are, of course, many things to say about that. I'm not inclined to be politically correct about it. I think that the first films that Peter made, they were decent enough. I think he managed to preserve a certain vision, certain aesthetic vision. He managed to impress a little bit of that epic tempo into the stories. And it's not an easy task, because it's not easy to translate from the written word to the screen. A lot less time at your disposal to develop characters, to develop the histories of the different peoples. But I think he made an honest effort. And much of the settings, the mise-en-scène, and all the rest of those details, the music, I think they are well. I think the cast is brilliant too. I think that the whole production was very professional and sensitive to my father's desires and needs. And I was consulted also concerning certain visions of my father's. However, I do think, and I must say, that the latest films that Peter Jackson made, based on The Hobbit, they are displaying a very childish vision, far from what my father would have liked to see, I believe. He rejected proposals for bringing out The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit previously because of those grounds, because everything was simplified and the villains became villains only and nothing else, and there was no larger history behind the whole thing. So I think that the whole, I won't even comment on the love affair between the dwarf and the elf maiden, of course. I think that's just perverse. But aesthetically perverse, I mean. Now again, I won't dispute the money-making merits of Peter Jackson, and I think he succeeded in what he wanted to do, and he wanted to make a lot of money on it, and he certainly succeeded in that. So my congratulations to him on that behalf.
Thank you, Christopher. So now it's going to be the time for my colleagues. It's your turn, and you can ask him whatever you want. Yes, hands up. Don't everybody at the same time, please. Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so if you don't want to ask anything special to Christopher, you can ask to any of the characters you have seen here today. No extra point in the final exam, so come on, venga.
Hello. It's working it? Yeah. Okay. Maybe with I have thinking in my mind when you were talking, and it was maybe the American children from whole America and all the European children have heard about Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. It was impossible 100 years ago, because in traditionally in the in ancient years, all the myths, all the tales were orally transmitted, and all the cultures in places were unique, were singular. But nowadays, because of the Hollywood phenomenon and television and so on and so forth, all these myths are collective to a huge amount of people. So in this case, the Lord of the Rings, and we all have the values of the Lord of the Rings that maybe are good or evil. I don't know, I don't care. But all of us have these values. What do you think about this homogenization, about this globalization of the culture in our world through the Lord of the Rings? Thank you.
The question is addressed to Christopher Tolkien, is that it? Or?
Probably, yeah, it's up
Probably.
to you, yeah.
I don't know. What would Christopher say about this? Christopher Tolkien was brought up as in a very traditional family in which strong emphasis was put on a British and English education and the English cultural heritage. And I think that Christopher Tolkien, if he had been here today, he would probably say that it's a big shame that much of that is being lost nowadays. As Martin, I would say that it's got its advantages too, and I think that there is nothing that enriches a culture so much as external influences, things coming from the outside. And I think what we're witnessing nowadays is this hodgepodge of different cultures, and they are brought into one single unity, as you say, and it's a globalized reality now. But I don't think that necessarily entails a single vision of the world. I mean, it might as well spread out in different and unexpected directions, even though we are now aware of so many different things. I think, as Martin now, I think it's a positive thing that we can engage with all these other cultural references, and they are so accessible to us nowadays. And it's up to us to do something with that. We choose what we do with it. I don't think it's a negative thing at all. Christopher Tolkien would probably say, no, yeah, it's a shame now that the English culture is being diluted. It's a conservative Englishman. over here.
Maybe it's a bit of a silly question, but I'm gonna bring back the race and feminism and all that shit. I was guessing. Okay, Tolkien will probably have never allowed. Maybe he can answer. Maybe he will have never allowed a character like Arwen or to be brought into the film with more, like more protagonism. And but his inheritor decided to allow it, and I'm thinking maybe the next generation of Tolkien right holders will be open to other characters becoming black or Asians or even gay, like I don't know, Frodo and Sam. Do you think that possibility may come in the future, or is totally a no-no because of Tolkien's own background?
So I think it's a good point. I think it's a very interesting question. And I was listening to an interview with George R.R. Martin the other day, the writer of Game of Thrones, and he was talking about what will happen once you've finished these books. You know, when you die, who will have the rights to those books? He has no children of his own, and he said, well, I don't know. I think it would be a shame if they adapted my stories in a different way, and in a way that I have not desired them to. But it's probably inevitable that they will do that one day anyway. And he said that Christopher Tolkien was a good example of someone who had sort of, kept the spirit of his father's works intact, which is not true. I think with the Hobbit films, that is definitely not true. I think that, well, Tolkien, he says one thing in one of his letters. It's an interesting thing that he says. He says he had this vision of creating this mythology that I mentioned before, a mythology for England, in which other hands, as is other artists, would be allowed to go in there and to continue with the work that he had already began, that he began with when he created the mythology. So he was interested in having other artists contributing to Middle-earth, to this vast mythology that he had been working on. He wanted, for example, musicians to be inspired by his world and to create their own original music, or painters, or other artists. So, I mean, to some extent, it is in keeping with his ideas that something like that should happen in the future. And I think many interesting things will be able to come out of those new adaptations too. I mean, the times are changing. We have all seen adaptations of Shakespeare that are not, necessarily purist. They are not to the taste of everyone, but they can be immensely interesting insofar as they reflect issues of contemporary times that are, very well expressed through, a great work of art such as a play by Shakespeare, for instance. And I think that it's very probable that something like that will happen when Christopher is gone, for example, and the next generation takes over. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, what do you think that Tolkien means when he says that Christianity is the true myth?
Well, I think he is being literal about that. He was a firm, a staunch Catholic believer, and he firmly believed that was the one true myth in which all other myths are reflected. And I think that's the video that was put on before. That's what he's trying to express. Now, this is not something. So yeah, I think it's literal about it. I think he really believed that was true. That actually happened as a Catholic, as a Roman Catholic. That's what he believed. It's also true that Tolkien was not he was not deprived of inner tensions when it came to his faith. He was divided between his admiration for pagan culture, for example. He was very much in love with Old Norse mythology, for example, or the Finnish mythology of the Kalevala, with all the pantheon of gods that we come across there. And he felt that there is a measure of truth in that too. I mean, all mythologies, they kind of reflect this true myth that he believed was true. And so even though there are only reflections, they still contain a little of that primordial light, that true light, I think. So, and he had tensions. I mean, all through his life, he had his doubts, and you can see that in his own writings, in his own annotations in the margins of books and stuff. for long periods of time he was depressed, especially in his old age, and he was not sure in the end whether he would actually be going to heaven or not. He had there was a conflict. There was a conflict there. So he says many things, of course, and it's when you read his letters, he makes a lot of statements that should not be taken necessarily at face value. I think that the things that he wants to say, and he says them, but he does not always feel them. He contradicts himself also at times. And in matters of faith, I think he was not this, confirmed, single-minded believer. He had his doubts too about that, which I think comes through in many of his tales. I mean, I don't know if you've read, for example, The Children of Húrin. It's another tale that was brought out a few years ago. It's a tragic tale of incest and suicide, for instance. And it's totally opposed to the positive messages that we'll come across in The Lord of the Rings, for example. It's a tragedy, and it's a brutal story, and deals with pagan reality, but also about those qualities that he perceived in pagan cultures. That idea of the northern courage, for example, that was something that he greatly admired. I mean, in Norse mythology, there is no guarantee that you will ever come to any place like heaven. Even the gods die in Ragnarök. Even the gods are obliterated there in that event. So it's a lot more fragile sort of world vision, and he admired it. He found it very attractive.
Yeah, and also he did not like when people read The Lord of the Rings in the light of Christianity. No. In fact, he said that he disliked allegory in all its forms, as we can read in his letters. So I believe that perhaps that ambiguity led him, in a sense, to have this kind of dislike for people reading his work in the light of Christianity. Perhaps because he also had his doubts. I don't know. It's just an opinion.
Well, yeah. I mean, he actually hated allegory. He thought it was a cheap trick to play on the reader, and he thought it was like it was the easy solution for a writer too, to do something like that. He didn't like that. For example, he did not like the Chronicles of Narnia, even though he was good friends with C.S. Lewis. They had strong sort of differences when it came to literary preferences, and he hated that. So he would never have wanted anyone to read this as a tale reflecting the Christian myth. It's built into the story, and it is there somehow in the story, and that's something that he admits too. But Tolkien feels that a good story, a good fairy story, should work on its own, should convince on its own. It should work as a work of art in the first place, not as a work of a Christian religion or a Christian doctrine, something like that.
Now this is a question for Martin.
Okay.
Well, you have translated Tolkien's translation of Beowulf. What is your personal opinion about that translation?
About my translation or his translation?
Both.
Both?
No. Tolkien's translation.
Yeah, okay. I'd say the following. That Tolkien, he used a more... he didn't want to make any concessions to modern English when it came to translating Beowulf. He had to render it in modern English, but he didn't want to make any concessions in rewriting the whole thing. He wanted to look for those precise words that are still available in the English language, although they are uncommon. And so it's not as easy to read as Seamus Heaney's translation, for example. It's not as poetical in the modern sense of the word. He attempted something quite different. He didn't want to publish that anyway, so he didn't prepare this for publication. That's another one of Christopher Tolkien's tricks, yeah.
Which one do you prefer?
Which translation I prefer? I prefer Michael Alexander's translation, actually. But
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
That's the best.
And as you know, Noor was the one who actually translated the verses of the Beowulf, Tolkien's Beowulf, and I translated the commentary and also a tale. But the interesting thing about this is that Tolkien imagined that before Beowulf, before this epic poem, which is like this monument in Old English literature, before this epic poem was surely based on a folk tale. Must have been based on some sort of folk tale concerning a hero going somewhere, doing some great deed, and having some friends dying in the process. So he decided that he would write a fairy tale that he felt would be like the original, that then people would have based the epic poem on. So he wanted to imagine what kind of tale that would be, what it would look like. So he wrote it. But characteristically, he wouldn't write it in modern English. He wrote that in Old English. He wrote the fairy tale in Old English. And then he translated it into modern English. So that was the way his mind worked. He had to be coherent with the historical situation, the historical context. And these, for example, accusations of being a misogynist, for example, is a bit taken out of context because he wanted to do something which is just out of the present context. He wanted to go back to some sort of previous reality. He didn't want to rewrite that. He wanted to render that reality using new stories somehow. I don't know, did I?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Last one.
Yes, Mr. Tolkien. Well, in the book The Lord of the Rings, what do you think that elves represent, and what is the meaning of their living to go to the west?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So if you want to understand the elves properly, you need to go back to the Silmarillion. You need to read the stories contained in the Silmarillion to read those myths, because the origin of the elves is there, and their motivations are best explained in those tales. What we have is it's a race which is created by the Godhead, which is Ilúvatar. Humans are also created by Ilúvatar. There are two different races. One race is immortal, the elves, and another race is mortal. They will die, the humans. And the humans are given this as a gift of God, the gift of mortality, it's called. And the elves, they are immortal, and their proper place to live is not in Middle-earth. It's not in the continent on which the Lord of the Rings takes place. They belong to a different place called Valinor. And many stories are told about this continent in the Silmarillion. And after, this is also a story of a fall. I mean, in a Christian way, in a Christian sense, the fall comes when Eve bites the apple and learns about good and evil, and from there it is. From then on, we have human history in a world of mortality. And in Tolkien's story, the fall is already present. It's already built into the universe because of the presence of an evil deity, right, called Melkor. And so the elves, they appear in the world, and they have good intentions, but some of them go bad. They are prone to corruption. They can be corrupted. And in particular, there's one elf called Feanor, who creates the Silmarils. They are gemstones, and they contain the holy light of two trees created by God. And so when the two trees are destroyed, the only pure light of God that's left is in those stones, is in those gems. And he has created them. So the other gods, they tell him, hey, why don't you open up that gem and give us the light back so that we can share it with the rest of the world? And Feanor says, no, I won't do that. I'll keep it to myself. And then comes the exile of the elves, and the elves, they have to leave that continent. They have to go to Middle-earth, right? And eventually they are pardoned, and they are allowed to come back again to Valinor. And the story of the Lord of the Rings is set thousands of years later. And most elves, they are going away. They are leaving the continent at that time. Some of them linger because they are in love with the beauty of the world. They love Middle-earth, and they enjoy it very much for aesthetic reasons, but they know that it's not for them. It's not their place. So the idea of the elves is that one side, I think, of humanity, which Tolkien believed was immortal. We have an immortal soul, whereas we have mortal bodies, and they are more in line with human beings. And this dichotomy between mortality and immortality is played out in the interaction between men, women, and elves throughout many of the stories. But the reason why they leave is that they don't really belong there in the first place, and the times are changing, and now human beings are taking over in the world instead. I'm not sure if that answered your question. Yeah? All right.
Okay, so, okay.
Short
The
one.
very last one.
As Raúl has dressed like Gandalf, I want to ask a question that can be related. Some of us in a coffee break were asking to ourselves if Gandalf is a manipulator, because, for example, in The Hobbit, he sends the dwarves to Bilbo's home without warning him. In The Lord of the Rings, he manipulates in a way to Frodo for a greater cause, but anyway. And what do you think of?
Is this for me?
For any one of you? I don't care.
Because I was Radagast, no Gandalf, so.
I will yeah. Okay, right, so what Tolkien says about this himself is that Gandalf, as a character, he is sent by the gods to encourage people, to bring out the best in people. But he can't act as a deus ex machina in the proper sense of that word, because that would deprive the tale of the dramatic tension. I mean, it's the same thing. The same question is, why didn't they just call for the eagles, give them the ring, and send them to Mount Doom and drop the ring there to begin? It's not part of the, that's not the way his universe works. It's a moral universe in a sense. Gandalf is. I mean, we can say that he manipulates to some extent, but he does so only because he wants to bring out the good qualities in persons who have left aside some of their own good traits that they had once. For example, Bilbo, he's become a bourgeoisie, unbearable sort of bigot in the Shire, and Gandalf, he makes him go on this trip, and he's the one who incites him to go, and because he knows that perhaps someday something even greater will come of it. He's got some knowledge of that. I wouldn't characterize him as a manipulator, no.
But what of Frodo then? Because Frodo is left completely shattered after he goes to Mordor and he throws the ring away. He is left completely like a shell, and when he gets back to the Shire, he does not feel like he belongs there. So what of him? Because it seems that Gandalf, in a sense, has destroyed his life, at least his earthly life.
Well, Gandalf never tells Frodo to take the ring and take it to Mount Doom. Do you remember the scene in Rivendell when they have this debate? And they are talking about the ring, who will take it? And it's not Gandalf who says, hey, give it to the Hobbit, he can take. No. It's like he comes up, he stands up out of his own will and he says, I will take the ring to Mordor.
He feels the pressure, in a sense.
We all feel the pressure at times, I think. What Gandalf, he has many sayings. He says, among other things, that it's not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to leave the earth a cleaner place than it was before, more or less. Not the exact words, but something like that. So we can't control everything, every part of our destiny, but we need to do our best in order to improve the world, to leave it as a place which is a little bit better than when we were there. And I think Frodo, he pays a high price. But he is given a reward in the end too. He goes to Valinor, becomes one of the few privileged to be able to go there too. So, yeah, but it's Frodo's choice in the end. I'd say it's a world of free will.
Okay, so we have to finish here because we are late as usual. Thanks for coming. Okay, this is the end of the presentation, and now just last words where Martin is going to tell you what we are working, why we are here, why we have done this different presentation about talking about the Lord of the Rings, and with that we will finish.
Yeah, well, it seems like I have to explain this, but the whole idea is Raúl's. I mean, we're sitting there, so he leaves that to me. Well, I don't know. I think that what we want to do is to try and take a little bit different approach to the canon, especially in terms of research, and to incorporate these new genres and these new fictions, this new literature that's out there, and I think it's interesting, and to bring that into the academia and to encourage students to do proper research on that. And we do encourage you. We invite you to come and talk to us about literature, about this or other types of literature, and you don't have to show up on time necessarily. You can be 5 minutes late and you don't have to wear a suit. So feel free to come by anytime. We're upstairs. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.